Since 1988, hundreds of New York City high school students have come here to meet and talk with poets and playwrights and fiction writers and hear them read from their work. And as we're doing tonight, what we do is bring the students to the Y by van, treat them to a pizza supper and a half-hour discussion with someone like Doris Lessing or Edward Albee or John Edgar Wideman or Frank McCourt. They then attend the evening's reading, receive copies of the author's books donated by publishers, and are taken home by van, delivered to their doors, a crucial safety measure in New York City, as you can imagine. I mention these details both so that you'll know the scope of the program, and also if you're an educator from a community somewhere outside New York, you might want to consider how such a project could be replicated in your own community in partnership with a reading series at a local, for example, or a bookstore. The Schools Project is offered free of charge to public high schools, thanks to the support of donors ranging from FedEx to private foundations and individuals through our Educational Outreach Committee. Tonight, I first want to thank the remarkable teachers I've worked with for 2 decades. It's their love of contemporary literature and their desire to share it with their students that's the key to our partnership with the schools. Second, I want to thank the writers who've met with students over the years, including those appearing here tonight. It's been amazing to be a bystander while someone like August Wilson jingled the change in his pocket and talked about standing on the corner in his old neighborhood in the Hill District, listening cocking his ear to the rhymes and rhythms in the air. Or when Nadine Gordimer tackled a question from a student about what it's like to grow up in a racist household. I've had teachers come up to me after some of these exchanges between writers and students and say, "I can't believe I was here." What never ceases to impress me is how generous and respectful the writers are toward the students. As one student wrote on an evaluation, "It was like we were adults." Finally, and most of all, I want to pay tribute to the students themselves, in particular to the students as writers, which is how our guests will be addressing them tonight. When I visit schools prior to a reading to introduce them to the work of a writer that they'll be meeting at the Y, I give them a writing assignment intended to provide a connection between their lives and what the writer is concerned with. In preparation for tonight's event, students read something by each of the writers who'll be talking tonight, including an excerpt from Mr. McCourt's memoir, Teacher Man. Inspired by his exhortation to his classes to write about their lives, these students wrote compositions using the title, Why This Story Should Be Told. One wrote about a grandmother who in 1937, at age 19, fled Nazi Germany alone, leaving behind her grandparents and her father, who wouldn't leave his parents, the girl knowing in the back of her mind they were all destined to die. Another wrote about the effect of gang pressure on succeeding generations of one family. Another about his dad coming home on the F train, jumping onto the steel tracks to save an unconscious elderly man who'd fallen. Then there's the grandmother in China during World War II, hiding under the stove as Japanese bombs fell in her village. The boy whose family had to live in one room in the Bronx for a year after their house burned down. The girl who was gang raped by the buddies of her supposed boyfriend. Several girls who describe themselves as proud and stressed teenage mothers juggling school, jobs, and childcare. The student who went from a home of drug addiction and mental illness into a series of foster homes. "I felt as if I were in a war zone," she wrote. "My story is about a young Hispanic girl who never gave up and went after her dreams. A boy who called his story "My Life Behind Bars" wrote, "Locked up for 4 months for something I didn't do. It was like a living hell, fighting every day, getting new cuts and seeing my blood on the floor, crying to go home, crying to see my family, crying to be free, to be equal again." Probably doesn't surprise you that New York City teenagers have important stories to tell, but what may surprise you is how rarely anyone asks for them. My long ago student and now friend Rebecca Powell, who's an accomplished novelist at this point, who's going to speak here tonight, told me something a few years ago I've never forgotten. She teaches at a Brooklyn high school, and she said she'd begun to realize that most adults don't talk to kids, often even their own kids. She and I agreed this is a tragic failure in terms of acquainting children with the world and including them in it. So I end tonight with this action of my own to the adults in the audience. Talk to your children. Ask them for their stories. Tell them yours. Make them feel part of the world. You create writers by telling stories, but you also create relationships. As one of my students wrote last week, this story should be told because it's my story, yet it's your story too.